Hello everyone and welcome to my tips and tricks for Monster Train 2 video. 10 tips for Monster Train 2 players, specifically to get you introduced to some of the core concepts of deck building and strategy in this frankly awesome game. It's a game with a lot of chaos and a lot of moving pieces, so it can be a little hard to figure out exactly which pieces of strategy are important when you first start out playing this game. But my goal with this video is to compile hundreds of hours of experience with the first game and some practice with the second game into some important and actionable items that can get you started on getting your first couple of wins easy peasy. So to do that, I'm going to jump into the beginning of a basic run here on Standard Covenant, just with the starting clans that you'll have available to you at the very beginning of the game, and pair these with some discussion about what exactly you should be doing and thinking about in your runs. Quick thank you to Big Fan Games for sponsoring our Monster Train 2 content on the channel. Let's dive right on into it and talk about what you should be thinking about in Monster Train 2. So, at the start of your run, you always have your hero, which is for this run, Fel. Of course, you also get 10 basic starter cards. 5 from your secondary clan, that's the fire starters here. 5 from your primary clan, the Just Causes. 2 shield stewards, 2 spear stewards. And then once you're on Covenant, you'll get 5 random cards as well. 4 commons, 2 pairings, and 1 unit to start, 1 uncommon unit. So you always have something to sort of start with here. And you can think of this as the foundation of your deck. Whatever strategy you might employ throughout the run is likely going to be an evolution of what you've got here in the starting deck. We'll also get to pick a champ upgrade and an artifact, which I'll just do reasonably quick here. I'd like to do the Revenge Fel. So each time we take damage, we'll apply Valor. And we'll grab our starting artifact, too. And already we see some of the important stuff here. When a friendly unit gains Valor, it gains 1 more stack, is the kind of thing you want to keep an eye out for. With your starting artifact, you're ideally hoping to get something that interacts with your champion, and this certainly does. So we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you definitely want to keep an eye out for things that synergize with the champion that you have. So let's dive into the first combat. You don't get to make a lot of whole choices before this. And then right here on this screen is where you should stop and take a moment. Because there's something really important here that you can do, which is inspect your enemies. Here's our first tip. At the beginning of each battle in Monster Train 2, you can mouse over the enemies, see their names, their stats, and any keywords or other abilities that you have, or that they have, rather. And that this is really important because it can majorly shape your strategy for the fight. So here we see that the boss starts with Sap 6. That means he starts with really low attack power and he gets stronger over time. We're dealing with enemies that have spikes, so we have to worry about our own units taking damage when attacking them. And there are these lurking miscreants, which say they add a Chime of Despair card to the top of the draw pile. Having this kind of information is really, really important. You're also presented with a trial at the beginning of each combat. Trials are a little tricky to know when to take or when to not take in Monster Train 2. But the one advice I have regarding trials, in this game especially, is take the first one. Take the first challenge, or rather trial. That's what I should have wrote there. In later fights, the trials can be very nasty and really punishing, but it's almost always going to work out if you take the trial on the first combat, because the base difficulty is low enough. Once you get to max rank Covenant, if you're doing high difficulty runs, there may be situations with certain starting clans where you don't want to take the first trial, but as a general rule, I'd say you really want this additional 75 gold from the first combat. This gives you a big head start into the merchants that you get on the first ring. So I strongly recommend, even if you don't take other trials, to take this one, the first one. Let's begin the combat. So we'll have to play with -1 energy per turn, but that's okay. New to Monster Train 2 is the deployment phase, where you get a whole separate turn to play all of your units onto the field. You'll draw anything that has a blue banner on it, plus your champion. And then anything that you don't play goes back into the draw pile that you'll have to draw through. First, an important piece of advice here is to choose a floor carefully at the beginning of combat. And here's where inspecting the enemies that you saw before the combat is really important, because which floor you choose, that is bottom, middle, or top, has a pretty big impact on how the fight is going to go, and which one is correct to go on really depends on what you're facing. As a general rule, the bottom floor gets to see the most action, that is, there's the most fighting, your units will take the most damage, and they'll witness the most kills. And the top floor gives you more turns to prepare, because the enemies have to move up through the train one floor at a time. That means deploying on the top versus deploying on the bottom means 2 more turns of preparation time. In this situation, for this deck, we have a unit that benefits from being hit, so you want this unit to be pretty low on the train so that they can get hit more times. And we're also facing enemies that will add curses to our draw pile. So both our strategy and the enemies in question are dictating a bottom floor setup here. But if you're fighting a different opponent or using a different deck, you might want to evaluate deploying on a different floor. So let's start out by dropping our Firebrand on the bottom so that they can activate their revenge effect. We'll put Fel also as a revenge effect. So you could have either or the other in front. I think we want to put the Firebrand in front and then have Fel in behind. More on that in a second. And then I do recommend using all of the Ember that you have available to you during the deployment phase. So I might as well drop a Shield Steward on one of these floors. All right. And so the combat begins. In fights in Monster Train, the most important thing typically is to, oh yeah, I mentioned use all your deployment Ember. That's our tip number 4, by the way. Make sure you're spending all of that Ember to get set up and as many things in play as quickly as you can. As you progress through the run, it's possible to get more Ember for deployment that you can use to get more things in play. If you've got more Ember than you have things to spend, then you should acquire more things to spend on. There's lots of options, whether it's units or upgraded equipment. Yeah, the deployment phase is insanely important. I think one way I can articulate it is that every card that you can play during deployment is like one free card draw, in addition to the energy that you actually got to put in play. But making the most out of the deployment phase is absolutely crucial. Once you've got your units down, it's important to have a damage plan and a survival plan. Each enemy unit is going to advance up the train 1 floor each turn, and will eventually reach the Heart Cage, is what it's now called, the Pyre, and deal damage to it. In order to prevent that, the only thing that you can do is kill all of the opponents before they can get to you. Typically, enemy waves are comprised of high health frontline enemies. They start with 30 to 50 health in the initial wave, and then by the end of the game, they'll have hundreds of health. And then behind those big frontliners are 1 or more backline enemies that'll have very low health, starting with just 1 little hit point on this guy. And later in the game, they'll have maybe 20 to 30 health. So you must have a plan to do damage to 1 or more high health units in front, as well as a plan to pick off the low health units behind. You need a 2-pronged damage plan. And then when the boss comes around, you'll need a plan for that. So let's see, we have Firebrand and Fel here. The Firebrand does 1 hit for a high amount of damage, and Fel does 2 hits for a smaller amount of damage. That means we'll probably mostly want the Firebrand in front, so that the Firebrand can do 1 large attack to wipe out the frontline tank, and then Fel can sweep in with her weaker attacks to kill whatever's behind the enemy. If Fel were instead in front, she'd do her multi-hit first, hitting the frontline units, which wouldn't kill it. And then the Firebrand follows up with a large hit, which will take out the weakened frontline tank, but then the backline enemies just get through. So typically, you want to deal a lot of damage all in 1 hit to the front enemy, and then follow up with smaller hits onto the back ranks. That said, there are many ways to victory. And I encourage you to be experimental with how you get there. Spells are also really helpful for this sort of thing. For example, Firestarter can deal 1 damage to pick off the backline enemy units. If you're stumped as to what you can do, here's an important one. You can play cards on both your units and enemy units. Even if they're cards that you wouldn't think you'd want to play on your units, you're allowed to. For example, I can play the Firestarter on my own unit, which would apply a revenge effect. So that would actually give Valor to the Firebrand. Or if I couldn't kill this Lurking Miscreant, we could use the Just Cause, which says Advance. That would give it Valor, which gives it a damage boost, but it also moves it to the front where we could kill it. So just some options here. On this turn, what we're going to do is, I imagine, just pick off the back nerd. We want to buff our units here. Let's give some Valor to Fel, as well as to the Firebrand. And then, oh yeah, I have no mana left, actually, so this guy will get to do a thing. I forgot about the challenge here. I was planning to Firestarter that one. In general, talking about sort of being aware of your enemies, in general, it's a good idea to inspect and read all the text on the enemies that you see. In particular, be aware of units that have purple circles of any kind, because that indicates an activated effect of some sort. Alright, so for the rest of this fight, you'll always see a collector spawn on each combat, and it's really important to be able to get the collector, even if you have to let an enemy slip by you, or otherwise take some damage. It's often worth it to get that extra money, because money is one of the main ways that you scale in a run of Monster Train 2. The merchants of various sorts are very powerful, and so it's essential that you find ways to get as much money as you can. Here, I think we're going to equip our Firebrand with the lava armor. That should cause this guy to die to the additional pyre gel he takes, and then we can snipe the collector. That's what I would do on this turn. Get one collector through, but that's what the train steward's for. We have two lava armors in this deck. That's cute. One on Fel, then. So we talked about damage plan, but what about survival plan? In order for your units to win boss fights, you need to have enough durability to survive for a little while. This is where having health becomes a big deal. Just like the enemy lines have tanks in front and weaker units behind, it's a good idea for you to do the same thing. Have high health units that you put on the front of the floor, with lower health units behind. That way the high health units take the damage, can live up to the punishment, and keep your damage dealers alive long enough to help with the boss. We're already winning this boss fight because of that aforementioned setup. We have a tank and a damage dealer, and the first boss doesn't require too much of a commitment. I guess we'll do a cleave here. Kill that minion. That's an example of what your first combat should look like. Now, the first combat's pretty easy, but things ramp up pretty fast. So you have to have an idea of how to build up the power of your deck in Monster Train. One of the ways to do that is to get money that we'll spend on things in the shop. And the other is to pick cards from card rewards. You'll get 2 card rewards after each combat. And knowing what to pick is pretty important. One thing that you should definitely keep in mind is that don't be afraid to skip. If you see cards that don't synergize with what you've got. You do get money for skipping in this game, but in general, the goal is to find things that you can use to synergize with what you already have, or to solve problems that you can't answer. So if you didn't have a way to kill backline enemies, then I'd be looking for ways to do damage to weaker enemies. I think what this deck struggles with the most at the moment is dealing damage to the frontline higher health enemies. That's where something like the Penitent's Blood Suit could work. You are allowed to equip this on enemy units, and they'll take damage when they ascend a floor. Rising range is not too bad either. Ascend and then advance could let you stack more than one unit on a floor, which is kind of cool. You know what, let's take Rising Rage. That can do some cool stuff. And then our second choice, we have a damage-dealing spell, a piece of equipment that we already have 2 copies of, or a minor weak unit. This would be more skippable, I think. You definitely don't want to take a card from every single card reward. The more cards you take, the larger the deck, the more turns it will take to draw through all the cards that you have, and that's not a desirable thing. I think I'll just skip this one. Don't be afraid to skip. Alright, after your first combat, you'll be thrust into the first ring here, where you get to choose left or right. I am generally of the opinion, definitely for Monster Train 1, and I think this still holds quite true here in Monster Train 2, that you should upgrade a unit pretty quick at the Merchant of Steel. Units on their own have acceptable stats. They won't hold up very long, though, once you start getting past the first couple of rings. So the main way to make sure that your units can last a lot longer is to give them upgrades for the Merchant of Steel. Oftentimes, the Merchant of Steel is offered at the same time as a unit banner. And here's my strong recommendation to you. Look at the contents of the Merchant of Steel first, so you can see all the possible upgrades that are here. And then after you've done that, and remembered what you see here, Multi-Strike and Endless, and Valor and Health, these are all pretty useful. Then look at the units that are available, and you can pick one based on what you think will go well with the upgrades that are being offered. And I think we have a synergy available that I would see here, which is this Magma Mauler says, on striking, apply Pyre Gel. We saw there was a multi-strike upgrade, so if you strike more times, you apply more Pyre Gel. That's what I would recommend here. And that's something you can make more informed if you looked at the Merchant first. It's good stuff. So let's give the Magma Mauler multi-strike here. And then I think we want to put some Valor on the Firebrand. It'd be nice to have the Magma Mauler and the Firebrand on the same floor. There was also the Extinguish and Endless interaction. I didn't talk about that, but that's true. The other unit in that card reward had an effect when they die, and this upgrade allows you to bring a unit back to life multiple times. So that would also be a synergistic interaction. Give that Firebrand more health. That way they make a good tank. The Firebrand in front, and the Magma Mauler behind. Very good stuff. Using your money wisely is pretty important here, so we could reroll for 50 gold, but the upgrades on the bottom all cost 80 or 90 gold each. We would only be able to buy one or two other upgrades, and so I don't think rerolling would be worth it here. I would advise, generally speaking, don't reroll if you cannot afford to buy the stuff that you'll see after rerolling. That'd be just a waste of your money. But what you should do is remove your starter cards. Remove early and remove often. I just mentioned how skipping is valuable because of more cards bloating the deck and making it take longer to get to your cards. Well, the opposite is true if you remove cards. Each card you remove means you are going to draw into your other stuff more quickly, more effectively, and more consistently, and that's really important. Typically, I recommend removing your starter cards. I tend to start with the Stewards. If you're not playing your Shield Stewards in the deployment phase, then go ahead and remove them. The Spear Stewards are very expendable, and I often remove these kind of first. But you can also remove your starter cards, the Just Causes or the Fire Starters. Depending on your exact clan combo and what starter cards you have, they may not be useful. But if you're playing them and they are helping you, then I would recommend keeping them. Especially with the Relic here, these Just Causes are a lot more valuable. So I'm going to purge a Spear Steward, one of these small units, now that we have other stuff that we're deploying early. Highly recommend dunking cards early and often. All right, we're going to do one more combat where I'll show off how the deck is starting to evolve a little bit, show off how the Magma Mauler works, and talk about my last couple tips. Again, on the front of removals here, there is very few ways to add card draw to your deck in Monster Train. So each and every card is quite valuable. And each time you can avoid drawing a bad card, it's quite a big deal. Also, as you climb the Covenant Rings higher and higher, you'll start to have to deal with curses being placed in your deck from the very beginning, and that definitely makes removals even more helpful. There's negative draw, though, with this trial. We'll skip this trial for the purposes of our video here, and just do out this fight, showcasing the Magma Mauler. I think we want to put Magma Mauler with Fel here. Once again, Firebrand wants to be on the bottom to gain tons of Valor. Because we have this Rising Rage card, we can now ascend the Firebrand to the front of the middle row. So I think what we're going to do is place the Firebrand on the very bottom, the Magma Mauler in the middle with Fel. Actually, Fel should be in front. We'll move her in front. And then we have the Ember to drop one Train Steward on the top, so you might as well. Yeah, I get some lava armor. And then we can cleave them. This is interesting. We have the tankier units are on the back on this fight. Honestly, the more the Firebrand gets hit, the better. So we don't actually want to kill these units, do we? Well, we do want to do damage to this thing. This enemy does more damage if it's at the front of the floor, which is kind of curious. I think I will cleave. That way this unit's almost dead. Stacking the Valor effect is a nice way to do survivability for the Banished clan, as each point of Valor gives 1 armor per turn to the front unit, or more accurately, after combat, the front unit gains armor up to the maximum of the stacks of Valor. So it's kind of like per turn armor. Alright, let's get Fel in front here. I think she should have lava armor too. Although I'd like to cleave here again. So forget the lava armor. Just keep killing these things. It's time we get the money for free. And here's our Rising Rage. So we're going to use this to push the Firebrand up to the next floor and then go to the front. This causes our floor to be over capacity. Movement effects are allowed to ignore the maximum of capacity of a floor, whereas summoning a new unit, you'd be subject to the maximum. So this allows us to have one more powerful floor here. That means the boss is pretty much toast. We'll use our fire starters to kill off their additional help. And then the boss on their own should be no match for this powerful floor here. And yeah, easy peasy. You can give Fel the lava armor after all. Good for her. So the multi-striking unit in the back here applies Pyrogel with each hit, which means the boss takes more damage with each hit, which means the boss dies pretty dang fast. Really good combination of ways to dunk that nerd. So Valor is definitely what this deck is currently doing, at least to some extent, on the Firebrand. That makes a card like Divinity pretty valuable. Lots of Valor all at once. Equipment in general is pretty good. I'll talk about equipment in a minute. We do have other equipment in the deck already. Let's grab the Divinity here. I would recommend that. And then this would feel like maybe another skip for me. These are doing things that are tangential to what we're currently doing. Cards that introduce a new keyword to the deck, or sort of scale your deck in a different direction than you're currently headed, are often not worth the cost of adding them to the deck. Again, every card you add is going to slow you down. So when you can find an excuse to skip, I do recommend it. I'll skip that second one. All right, and just a couple more things to talk about here in Ring 3, our last couple of gameplay tips for you all. First one is going to be talking about scaling and thinking about how to progress the deck from here, which I call look for ways to multiply, and that is to sort of multiply your total output. You can think of the effectiveness of your deck as a formula that's partially dictated by all of the ways that you do damage. So we do damage equal to the Firebrand's attack power plus its Valor plus however much Pyrogel the enemy has. And then Fel hits for her base damage plus her Valor times 2, again, plus whatever Pyrogel the enemy has. And then the Magma Mauler hits in there. At the start of the game, we only need to do hundreds of damage to tackle bosses, but as the game progresses, you'll need to escalate that to thousands. So you're looking to make the math formula of your deck create essentially a very large number. This is not a game that's calculation heavy. You don't need to do a lot of mental math or adding and multiplying to win the game, but you do need to understand how to improve the output of essentially the formula that you're creating. And multipliers are a big part of that. So multipliers in Monster Train can come in many forms. They can come in the form of unit upgrades. Multi-strike is a multiplier because you're taking your attack value and then you're multiplying it by 2. You're doing another attack. When a unit has good base attack value, adding something like multi-strike is really, really helpful. But if the unit has, let's say, 1 base attack, then adding multi-strike does very little. You just do 1 more damage with 1 multi-strike, right? The idea is to add a flat number to get a decent base stat. You know, 10 is better than 1, and 20 is a lot better than 10. so on and so forth. Once you get up to, 20 or 30 or 40, it starts to become a lot easier to make the number bigger by multiplying it than it is to keep adding to it, right? Getting from 30 to 50 is pretty tough, but getting from 30 to 30 by 2 is not that hard. So as you progress through a run of Monster Train, you want to keep an eye out for anything that you can find that will increase the number that you're multiplying your total output by. So like I said, that can be multi-strike. It can also be a relic that doubles the effect of one of the keywords in your deck. Celestial Cascade, I would say, is kind of like a multiplier in that it's every time we get Valor, we get more Valor. That's a big deal. And so finding a multiplier like that is really important. You can also scale by having more units on a floor. That's a multiplier if you've got more units packed into one space. And so a card that lets you overstack a floor like that can be very helpful. You can also find multipliers from equipment and rooms. And so another really important piece here in Monster Train 2 is the Merchant of Arms, which I strongly recommend taking big advantage of. Rooms and equipment are new in this game, but they have really huge effects. A room applies to all units on one floor and provides a static effect. Something like the Fight Club here is really useful for plus 15 attack power to everybody inside it. The more times that your units hit and the more units that you have that are hitting, the more this will be affected. So this is a flat value that you then multiply with all your multipliers. Equipments can do something similar. This particular equipment, Soul Smelter, I wouldn't say is very useful for this build, but there are equipments that do things like add high amounts of stats or give you multi-strike that would definitely help you with multiplying. Equipment in particular, more so than rooms, I think are important because one of the options that the merchant offers you is the ability to merge 2 different equipments into one, and then you can give that deployable, which is currently behind my face here. Deployable lets you deploy a room or equipment during the deployment phase. So going back to taking advantage of that deployment phase, I think in here I would definitely take the Fight Club and then give it deployable so that we can start with plus 15 attack power on everybody. But the exact equipment or rooms that you want are, of course, going to depend on the specific room, specific plans and strategy that you're going for. Another reason that equipment, especially merged equipment, is important is one last thing that I'll mention, our last little tip here in this video before we wrap things up, which is to plan around card duplications. In each run of Monster Train 2, there are several Empyrean Wells that will spawn on the map that allow you to duplicate any card except for your champion. This is also a multiplier, essentially. What's one way to do twice as much damage? Well, what if you just had 2 copies of the best card in your deck? So something that I advise on every run of Monster Train is to keep an eye out for where these Imperial Wells are, and then by the time you reach them, have a card that you want to duplicate. In this case, I would recommend duplicating either the multi-strike Magma Mauler, which could be 2 of these in a row, could be very strong, or you could maybe duplicate the Firebrand and try to deploy them on separate floors so that they can each tank. In order for your duplication to have the most impact, you want to upgrade the card that you're going to dupe to the maximum amount. So by default, that's 2 upgrade slots on a card. So upgrade the card 2 times before you duplicate it, because the duplicated card will retain any upgrades that it has. All right, and those are my 10 tips for beginners and newcomers to Monster Train 2. Whether you're just starting out in this game or you've got a lot of experience in it, I hope that the things that I talked about in this video give you some ideas for the kind of decision-making that you need to be thinking about in order to succeed in Monster Train 2, and I hope it gave you some ideas as to what exactly you need to be doing during your run. If you like this video, please don't forget to drop a like below the vid. If you're interested in getting Monster Train 2, I've got a special, you've got a unique link that links to the store page just to me that'll tell the devs that I sent you. Another big thanks to Big Fan Games to sponsoring Monster Train 2 videos on our channel here. Thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you learned something. If you did, please let me know in the comments below how your run went, or if you've got other tips that you think other players should know. Please feel free to contribute those in the comments as well. Thanks once again for watching, and toodaloo, everyone.
If you enjoyed that video, watch this one next, and don't forget to follow on Twitch to watch the content live.
click the link in the description below.